unhooked. So I don't know if I'm so different in that regard. I don't know. I think I was able to relax there, and I'm not an adrenaline seeker. I mean, I don't actually like high speeds or sort of scary, dangerous things. I'm much better with like slow motion emergencies than high speed emergencies. Like, oh, someone has hypothermia. Like, okay, I can think this through and I'm going to deal with it. But like, oh my gosh, we're like about to crash into this, go off a cliff. Like, then I'm just like, I want to throw out my hands and be like, okay, you know, I guess I'm dying now. Goodbye, world. I do not like high speed problems. And I don't know what it is. I think that I thrive while being solitary. I like the physical work. I like being outside. My body handles cold well, which is not negligible. You know, being around dogs, I will never get tired of being around dogs and building relationships with them. And I also, the other thing now is that I spend so much time in front of a computer screen because that's my work, right? Like I'm writing for magazines, or I'm editing, or I'm
Station.
You know, just doing sort of building a career within the literary world, and I'm just always staring at a screen when I'm at my desk, and I'm in my head, like nothing physical is happening. I'm thinking, I'm obsessing over word choice, right? And then I go outside and I'm not in my head at all, and it works really well for me as a balance.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I mean, it seems like in a couple of things that you've said, this idea of fear has come up. Whether that was, you know, when you were saying you're feeling afraid of men, you know, what would you say, I guess, in addition to that, are other really tangible fears that you have had to face?
Well, when you write a memoir, suddenly you have to tell people things that you never thought you'd have to tell them. You know, I ended up talking to my parents about ways I'd been angry at them since I was 16. It's personal, and you can't. So that was scary, right? I was afraid of what people would think, and actually I've only had good responses, which is so far, which is miraculous. I would say I'm really scared of my dogs getting hurt, of losing my dogs. And I lost 2 dogs this year. And that, I mean, it's the hardest thing, you know, and they're healthy until they're not. I mean, this breed really tends to like compensate and compensate and compensate. So, you know, I had my lead dog who was only 5 years old, and one day his face was a little swollen, and I brought him to the vet, and the vet was like, oh, it looks like, you know, maybe he got an infection in his gums from eating something sharp. Put him on antibiotics. Within 2 weeks, he was blind and deaf and dying of lymphoma. Wow. So, and I've heard that story again and again, and I've seen it happen. Like they're very healthy dogs, but because they're sort of so hardy, they will be like strong and fine and healthy until suddenly whatever it is just like hits a tipping point, and you know, their body can't do it anymore, and suddenly you see all those symptoms really fast. If you're hearing toenails right now, it's because I think Flame is like, why are you talking about sick dogs?
Route 308, that's interesting.
Honey, you're in the way.
Is this West Sunbury? If this is West Sunbury, then
that
was insanely close to the other one.
That you grieve. That is the hardest thing. It's not like a fear that I can face. It's you know, a deep sorrow that comes with loving this many animals.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the emotional depth. That's part of what, you know, part of this lifestyle. So, you mentioned moving to your fiance's farmland. How'd you two meet?
We met in Iowa at grad school, and we were in the same cohort, so we started the same day, and all 4 of our classes were the same. And that summer, and he had just ridden his horse across the Dakotas and like rode his horse to school, and had been working as a cowboy.
That's pretty neat. That's something I was in Rhode Island.
Like, this is pretty good. Like, this is a pretty
Rhode
good
Island that
combination.
showed up for class.
And what is his interest in the Arctic and or dog sledding?
Well, he's a horse guy. So like the house we live in now, we have this beautiful log house. He built it out of logs that he pulled out of the forest with a team of draft horses. So like he's like a caricature of like the most lumber sexual cowboy ever. I mean, it's like a joke.
He's like a lumberjack.
But he was in the military for 8 years and did a lot of like cold weather survival training. He would teach cold weather survival.
So he needs to I love the winter. I got it. Okay.
Well, that was one of the things we bonded over is, you know, it'd be cold and we'd be like, let's go outside, let's go play in it.
Below zero, there's just something
so
weird
he had his
about
horse
that. Like,
we
I don't
named
know, I either
Untitled.
want to go into like deep hibernation or I want to be outside.
I didn't have dogs yet, but he took to it. He was really encouraging. He was like, hey, you know, that's not my thing, but if you get dogs, I'll be part of the team and I'll, you know, and he'd be up late at 2 in the morning reading obscure articles by mushers from 50 years ago, and he'd like nudge me and be like, hey, like it says if we, you know, put this, I don't even know, he geeks out on it in a way I don't geek out, like, okay, if we do this like very specific schedule, or hey, it looks like if we put olive oil on their noses, I mean, that's not true, but like it's things like that. And so he's taken to it because he has this experience with animals and cold, and he's physically braver than I am. Like he'll be like, hey, I'll jump on a 10-dog team going down a mountain, and I'll be like, maybe you know, maybe I'm gonna do 5 dogs and do it twice. And so he's really gifted, and it became something we do together.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, and I would imagine that's important too, given, like you said, it's not something that you just do for a half hour or an hour in a day. This is like so much of your life.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about like dog sledding divorces, because it's just, you know, if one person has 5 or 10 or 40 dogs and the other person isn't into it, you have to be. I mean, he is allergic to dogs, which is sort of the one thing. So I'm really careful, and you know, when the dogs come in the house, they're only in sort of like my space, like my office, and they don't go near the couch or anywhere like that. And I always wash my hands after petting them and stuff.
You can help out with them, or you can't be anywhere now.
Nothing like raising 11 puppies when you're allergic to dogs.
Oh my God. You last all summer, so I raised the puppies on my own.
Okay. Oh, well, that's a whole other layer of complications, right?
Right.
So tell me what you are training for right now.
Crossing, but there's no parking lot there.
Right now
We're
I'm
still
working
north
to
of West Sunbury.
qualify for the Iditarod. And the Iditarod is an 1,100-mile race across Alaska every March.
Year. I can't believe I was in Alaska just a year and a month
way more
ago.
people have like summited Mount Everest than completed the Iditarod. It's
it's pretty amazing.
You know, it bills itself as the last great race on Earth. There's a couple dog sled races of that length, but it's the most commercial. You know, it's the one with the most press, and it's I mean, it's almost like qualifying for like the national championships or the Olympics. Sorry, this dog, Flame, you're being really annoying.
Here. Okay, so this is the North Country Trail. Where's the parking
She just
area?
wants all my attention all the time. But it's, you know, like,
gas station. This is
it takes years. It takes years to qualify. You have to do 700 miles of qualifying races, and like before that, you have to qualify for the qualifying races, and it just takes a long time. So I have done one of my 3 official qualifiers, and then the other 2 I can do over the course of one season, and the season after that, you know, knock on wood, I'd be qualified. But it's funny, it's kind of creepy, because this one was, you know, 200 miles, and it was in a dog care and sportsmanship, ability to tolerate cold, ability to handle dogs in heat, ability to take care of your dog's feet, whether you're crabby or not to other mushers. Like, it's this ridiculous report card, and then you get like a written evaluation from everyone.
Okay.
And if you do well enough, then they write a letter to the Iditarod saying that they want to nominate you. So I have one of those down that I did successfully, and it's the only one I've attempted, so I'll do 2 more next season.
So why are the standards so high?
I got a pretty big score in everything except for fire bolting, which is my weakness. I need to practice.
Fire building. Should have the Olufingers class last year.
It's really dangerous, and it's really
Here we go.
Right? I mean, they don't want
this is the future
anyone
North Country Trail.
who they don't think can successfully finish it.
That makes sense.
This is going to take us to Route 8.
You know, it's like, is it hard to get into the Tour de France? Like, you can't just be like, hey, I ride a
Clay
bicycle.
Township line. So I went out of Cherry Township and then go Township. Now I'm in Clay Township.
You know, sort of get there first.
So in addition to
the North Country Trail, all the way from
skills that you would want to gain or improve on,
east
or
to Clarion,
like, basically, who do you have to become like within yourself? What do you think needs to happen in order to be able to successfully do this race?
I think the biggest thing, part of the reason that I had puppies this summer is that if I put the Iditarod in 2 or 3 years, they'll be 10 and 11, which like maybe they can do it, but maybe they're also getting arthritis. I certainly know of 11-year-old dogs who have run 1,000 miles well and done well, and I also know of some who are kind of like, you know what, it's time for me to like get a couch. So you know, these puppies are sort of going to be my racing team, and so I think the biggest thing, it's the first time I've ever had my own puppies, and I just want to raise them right. You know, I want to train them to be really solid and forward oriented and find their way around obstacles and love what they do. And you know, some of that'll be easy and some of that'll be harder, but it's really different. It's really different to have your own dogs versus running someone else's. And I just imagine that having puppies that you've sort of caught when they were born, it's an even deeper bond. The dogs that I feel I have the closest relationship with are the ones that I got when they were younger. And we just sort of grew together. Whereas the older ones, it's more like, oh, I can learn from their experience. And they've got it down, and they're sort of like, you know, they have their network already.
Yeah, I mean,
so
that totally makes sense.
It's going to be really exciting.
Yeah, so I'm always curious when someone has a really big long-term goal, because you said, hey, if you're qualified in 2 or 3 years, like how you maintain the balance of, like, you have this big goal, you're really excited about it, but it has such a long timeline. I don't know, like mentally, what helps you to stay focused on something that's still so far away?
It doesn't seem very far away. I think that it's, you know, I always thought, okay, I'm going to do longer races and bigger challenges with my dogs, but only if it's fun, right? Like, I'm not actually interested in like 3 days and your headlamps out of batteries, but it still just sort of feels right to me to be around the clock on the trail with your dogs. The transition from being alone with them to not being alone with them is always jarring. Like when you finish a long run or a race, or if there's people around and you go from this sort of meditative but also very intense, demanding state of being out in the woods with them, and suddenly it's like, oh, maybe like your hands are up and they start feeding, and like there's all these complicated things, and I sort of love pushing, extending that time when it's just me and them.
Yeah, right. Which, I mean, in training for an 1,100-mile race, I assume that you will have plenty of that time.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm still learning so much. I'm just moving up into long distance from mid distance, which is like, you know, 20 to 80 miles. And so I'm just learning all the time from it. So it's new. You know, I don't know if I'm going to want to do the Iditarod year after year after year and be sort of a career distance racer in the way that a lot of really great mushers are. But right now I love just sort of always learning and always be trying new things.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, that makes sense. Also, when it's something that's new, that there's so many opportunities, it's like such a fertile ground for growing and learning because you have to.
For sure. And it's just, dog sledding is one of the only sports where women and men compete together. There's only 3 sports that are like that on the professional level. And I've like met so there's way more men than women, but I've like gotten to know other female mushers, and having my own dogs, I'm able to sort of befriend mushers in a different way, where instead of like being a handler, it's like, okay, we're all figuring out what are we going to do this winter, what are we going to do if we have a warm spell in January throughout the Midwest, and then all our frozen meat thaws. All these things, there's really a communal effort for something that's so spread out.
Mm-hmm. So your book, I want to talk about your book. Obviously, having gone to an MFA program doing this, it's not like you just randomly decided one day, hey, maybe I'm going to try my hand at writing a book. But I'm curious about your writing process. Once you decided to do this, what did the process of writing this book look like?
I sold the book 4 years before it came out. So it came out in July, and it's done really well. It's gotten a lot of like good national press, good reviews. So I'm really excited about that. I've been hearing from readers I don't even know, which is sort of mind-boggling to me. I'm like, you're not my friend. Like, why did you feel compelled to pick this up if you're not doing me a favor? But like, they do, and I'm grateful. But I sold it 4 years ago on proposal. I sent out a proposal through my agent, and she sent it out to publishers. And then I was just sort of working on it, going back and forth to Norway, editing and revising and working with my editor. And usually I'd write in the morning, and then I would do dogs in the afternoon and evening. And it's been weird. It was weird once it sort of was out of my hands. My life is fairly split between being very intensely about writing and very intensely about sled dogs. And I think luckily I was able to, turn my focus just a little bit more to the dogs, and it didn't feel empty to me.
Mm-hmm. So, and also, like, having worked on something for 4 years, talk about long-term goals, right? Like, it's not like this isn't
That's
anything,
true.
Yeah. So, do you have any, I don't know if tips or advice is the right word, but thoughts, anything for either new writers or struggling writers or anyone who's interested in writing their own memoir? Like, anything from your own experience that you would share?
For sure. I think,
this is Halston Road.
I haven't heard this from other places really, but I feel pretty strongly about it. I think that when you don't want to write, people talk about overcoming writer's block and how to get past that. And I think when you don't want to write, you shouldn't write. Writing is communication, and she's very good at arguing. And I have to like step up and argue right back at her to convince her to do homework she doesn't want to do. And she was saying, look, she's like making this claim in her writing, and she just feels like people will just be turned off by it, and she's so afraid that people are going to dismiss it immediately that she can't even put it on the page. And then when she does, it's sort of defensive. And that really comes through. And she said to me, she was like, look, like I feel like what I'm trying to do is tell people, hey, look, there's a pink elephant in the sky over there. And their response is just going to be no. Like I'm just telling them something that they're so instantly going to believe isn't true that it's just, there's a total block of communication. And I don't know how to start making that case. So I had her pause all the work she was working on. And for several weeks, I just had her write to me about the pink elephant in the sky. So I was like, look, I'm a reader and I need you to write me an essay that will convince me to at least take seriously the idea that there's a pink elephant in the sky. And she ended up, it's goofy, but it was a way of, tackling the anticipated disbelief and developing those skills and finding out, oh, if I go about it this way, like that helps pull the reader in. Oh, maybe I feel like I can have this sort of camaraderie with them if I use this technique. She was able to find those techniques on something that felt really goofy, and then when she went back to, her own work where something was really at stake, she hadn't been testing things out in that scary place. She'd been testing them out in a place of play, basically.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, that totally makes sense. It makes sense too, the way you're characterizing that, like, the heart of all of this is just being able to get to, like, the truest of the truth and say that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, and if I think of the things that I have enjoyed the most as a reader, it's all stuff that operates in that space.
Well, it's so easy. And I was at my MFA, I was at, you know, I was sort of there in the middle of this big debate about, like, truth in nonfiction and how much can you know, in your memoir, can you change the order of things if that makes it easier for the reader, like conflating characters. Can you say there was an apple on the table when there was a banana? Really sort of like extensive debate about that, which eventually I'm not that interested in. I mean, I sort of don't care if someone changes the fruit on the table in their writing, and I also, my priority in my writing is to do everything I can to be as factual as possible, but in an artful way. And what I became really interested in wasn't whether people were like fudging the truth or not, but why they wanted to. And I kept that in mind. I actually, the first draft of my book, I didn't feel the need to tell the truth. It was only for me, and I sort of like wrote the story as I like imagined it in my head and felt good about. And then what I did is I printed it all out and spread it out on my floor and went through, and every time I came across something that was even slightly not true, I would think, okay, why didn't I want to tell the truth there? Why did I think that this was too messy or too complicated or would reflect badly on me or someone else? Or like, what fear of being boring, of being, you know, whatever it was made me change this? And then I would like push even harder, to be honest. Like, I would change it to whatever was factual, but I would go even deeper into that, because those are moments, like whenever you're inclined to change the truth, that's a moment of really deep truth. And that's what's scary to get at. You know, so I want students or people I'm working with to go through and not fight the urge to like smooth over something or simplify it or you know, slightly fib, but just notice those moments and figure out what that impulse is about, and that's where something really real and important is going on.
Yeah, because I mean, I guess I could be wrong, but it doesn't really matter whether it's an apple or a banana, right? Whereas like this other like it's an interesting question. Like, I'm always interested in like even truth, right? Like, what is true? There's very few things that are like fundamentally inarguable truth, but it's like, why are you telling the story, right? Because it's not like a transcript court reporting, right? And then they picked up the apple and then this, like, that it doesn't matter if it's an apple or a banana. But that other instance where, like you said, you're trying not to speak about something that, I don't know, it's like the emotional truths and like the personal growth and like the interpersonal reactions or interactions. That's always what I'm more interested in than like whether like the walls were white or gray.
As it talks about sexual violence, it was really, really important for this project that it be unimpeachable. So I was like calling people and being like, hey, what kind of sandwich did you eat 8 years ago? You know, that sort of thing, because I wasn't comfortable telling the story unless I could really, really stand behind it, all elements of it. But I mean, the most important honesty is emotional honesty. And that's how fiction works too, is it's, you know, fictional situations, but honest emotions. And oh, I lost my train of thought for a second. But I've really come around, I think, through doing this project to feeling like, okay, you know, ultimately, if you're writing and you change it to a banana, I don't care. Like, I'm not offended as a reader. I don't feel deceived. Like, whatever. It's a fruit on a table. But I think that the more you keep the details totally true, the more opportunity you're giving the reader to figure things out that you haven't even figured out yet.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
So what's been really cool is that because of specific details that are things like what kind of sandwich someone ate, I've had readers come forward with insights that I don't even know. Like, the truth is smarter than you are, and it's an apple on the table for a reason. And yeah, it'll be a good story still if you say it's a banana, but if you say it's an apple, like, there's some sort of reason for that, and it has to do with with like, you know, something basic like the seasons, or something like, you know, you're in the middle of the city and you can only get good bananas but not good apples, or whatever, and that just deepens it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you just said, that the truth is smarter than you are. That, I mean, that's incredibly insightful. I'm like standing slow clap for that.
Oh, thank you. I mean, that, for me, that's a compelling reason. I'm not super compelled by like, oh, you know, well, I feel deceived, or, oh, like I should have artistic license. I just feel like, look, the work I'm interested in doing and the work I'm interested in reading is, you know, is really smart, right? And the truth is way smarter than you are. The story is smarter than you are. There are things going on in the story you have no idea about, even as you're writing it. But the more accurate your details are,